Hi friends, a little update here on the Flask project. It takes so long to kind of shoot and edit and then upload a video that in the time that it would take me to do one little video about one stage, it's much easier to think about things and then redesign them on the computer and then think about them more and then redesign them on the computer. So in that time that I would have taken to make one little update video, the whole project has progressed quite a lot, and I'm not even showing you the amazing stage we're at now. I'll show you that in a sec. But just a tiny recap. So the last thing you saw was me casting version 3. If you remember, it was pretty nice, but there was a bow and I was trying to get rid of that. And it had finally dawned on me that these ribs were really just for the PLA model and not the aluminium part. So after that video, I started to think in terms of reducing the ribs altogether, particularly these ones. Do you remember I was going to make these thinner as well, like the version before was? I was going to try and reduce the height of everything. I really just wanted to almost get rid of everything and just get down to a flat plate, because that would help a lot with the bowing aspect of it. So I went straight to version 4, which actually sits here. Now version 4 is essentially a flat plate, and I redesigned the tapered dovetails to be super small. They're only half the height of the tapered dovetails in this version. I was kind of pleased. I thought actually there's promise to this. I printed some, and unfortunately when they go together you can see there's a significant bow at the join, and I think this is due to the dovetail being a little bit too small. But I was thinking at the time that perhaps it's because these ribs here, I'd done away with them, and really the only thing stopping it bend this way was these tiny little 45 degrees here. So I binned that one and reprinted it with the same small dovetail, but with ribs in between. It did help things significantly. As you can see, the bow is a lot less. It's still there though, and it was getting annoying now because I didn't really want to start with a pattern that had a bow in it, because then the very best I could hope for is a part that would have a bow in it, and I didn't want to rely on sort of using force to bend things back into the right place. I just wanted to have a pattern that was straight and flat, much like these ones were. I was just trying to reduce this but get the same flatness. And unfortunately version 4.2 didn't cut it, which was a real shame. So that led on to version 4.5, and that is essentially the same except taller again. And unfortunately it's still got a bow, and I was then starting to think, okay, it's the tapered dovetail, it's not the ribs. And so I binned this. So bear in mind, each one of these takes like 16 hours to print and a good 4 hours to design. So after all those disasters and a lot of time, I binned version 4.5 and I went straight to version 5, which is essentially version 3 but with thin ribs. It's almost dead flat, and you only have to put a tiny bit of pressure on it and it becomes flat. But it isn't dead flat. Version 3 was dead flat. Version 2 was dead flat. Now, this has taken quite a long time and a lot of kind of thought and testing and that kind of thing, and that's fine. And I was going to cast this next. I was actually going to cast the version 3 with a feeder. So I was going to cast this one, which was the one that bent the most, remember, with the fat columns here. I was going to cast this one alongside the new version 3, which is version 5, and compare the two. That was about 3 days ago. As you know, Perry and I, SwDweeb, we're good mates, and we're sort of always emailing each other about anything, casting, life, everything. And he happened to ask how the whole Flask project was going, and you know, he was saying it was really fun to watch, and I sort of basically gave him a little tiny summary of what I'd done in the meantime, and that was that. Then it was the weekend, and I sort of did my own thing and did some running and enjoyed my life for a weekend and forgot about casting and the Flask project. And I thought, great, let's get back to the Flask project. I'll cast a version 5 alongside the fat columned version 3, but with the feeder, and we'll compare them. And I was getting ready to do that when I received an email from Perry. And this email changed everything. In it was a little diagram, this diagram. And I knew straight away this was a really clever idea. This really could be something amazing. But I had one doubt, and I told him about it. I fired him back an email saying, holy, this looks amazing, but it's got an overhang of 90 degrees. Essentially, the male slot has got a long shelf that has to be printed that will be above the print bed and basically a large bridge, and there's nothing beneath it to support it. And during this whole project, one of the major things I wanted to achieve with the whole thing was to make it easy to print. Because on the best of days, sometimes I have terrible prints come out of my printer, and I really want to avoid supports at all costs, which means avoiding 90-degree overhangs. And I basically said, that looks amazing. My one doubt is that 90-degree overhang. Leave it with me, I'll think about it for the next couple of days, and if we can get over that, this could be the new way forward. Anyway, within 10 minutes, a little moment, I basically sent him an email saying, I think I got it. My idea was to take Perry's idea, which was incredible, and split that long shelf, and instead of having one shelf that was going above another shelf, my idea was to split them into fingers, and the male fingers moving into the female fingers. But if I was cunning enough, I could make each finger based on a triangle of sides of 45 degrees, which is totally easy for a 3D printer to do. It's when you get to 90 degrees or flat that the overhangs are a nightmare. Printing a triangle at 45 degrees is dead easy for a 3D printer because it's always printing onto the bit below it. It's just slightly off to the side, and as it goes, it just works its way up, and it's just a perfect 45 degrees. So that was the new plan. I spent the next 4 hours feverishly designing. These fingers are based on triangles. They're actually kind of square in section, but they start thin, get wide, so that the 3D printer's always got something stuck on the bed. And with that square shape on its end, a kind of a diamond shape, so this side, the female side, is also printed with a 45-degree overhang as well. Nothing over 45. I mean, I think it might go to about 47 when I include certain things I'll talk about in a minute, but it's nothing like 90. 90 has to be avoided at all costs. I'll show you these in close-up because they're kind of neat. Okay, so this was my first take on Perry's slot idea. Instead of the slot along the bottom, all I've done essentially is remove half the slot in a vertical segments and then change the shape of each slot, and obviously on the other side have the fingers fitting in a female version of the fingers. Now as you can see, if you look underneath, both the hole parts and the finger parts always start on the print bed. There is no part with an overhang, and when I first got these off the printer, I was so super excited. I was emailing Perry going, oh my God, Perry, if this works, this could be incredible. And I put them together. So at the moment, this hole is exactly the same size as these fingers. And bear in mind that I printed this at 0.2 millimeters in fast mode. So that is the least accurate that my printer can go. There is one setting worse, but I never use it unless I'm in a massive rush and tolerances don't matter. But tolerances do matter with this. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention. It isn't just a basic diamond or square. If you look side on, it's flat along the bottom because it has to be on the print bed, but I've tapered it along the top surface. I've actually put draft on the top two surfaces. So the bottom two surfaces are exactly 45s, but the top two surfaces are tapered down, and that way it's not a firm fit until you actually get the parts actually fairly close together, because I was worried that because the fingers are fairly long that they would snap off inside the other part and it would be a nightmare to separate. So I made the wedge in order to kind of circumvent that. Anyway, so I got them off the print bed, put them together, was ready for a little celebration, and so I'm pushing pretty hard there. I don't want to push with all my strength because I'll never separate them. But as you can see, there's a 3mm gap. So that's not great. But if you look down, they are absolutely dead straight. So I was well chuffed. This could be the new way forward. And I was thinking, wow, this is pretty amazing. Lovely and straight down there. But you may not notice on camera, there's a very slight, you may not see it, this piece here, the male piece, is on a slightly different level to the female piece. The male piece is like 0.1 of a millimeter above this female piece. And that is because the way they're printed, these holes, the bottoms of the holes are just slightly too small. I think it's all to do with the first layer squishing. It's called the elephant foot effect. But what I had to do was I had to make these holes bigger. All I did was I scaled the holes by 5% and made them bigger. So I kept the male parts the same, but the female holes I scaled at 5% bigger. And then I did a reprint. And that's what this is. But it's nearly perfect. I mean, I say nearly, it is perfect, but I would call that a tiny bit too loose. I wanted them to hold together a little bit more firmly. So I redid it again, but with, instead of a 5% increase in the hole, I went to a 3% increase in the hole. And that is where we're at now. Look at this. And because of that amazing photo that Perry sent me, and the subsequent complete redesign of the whole thing with the slot turning into fingers, it's essentially the same, except instead of one big slot that has got a 90-degree overhang, which I didn't want to do because of printing problems, I turned it into 8 fingers, which will all print really well because they're all on the print bed, and equally 8 holes, which will also print well because they're all supported on the print bed. And because of that idea, essentially, we've done away with these fat columns that were having to house the tapered dovetail. And I think those fat columns were the ones that were causing it to bend. It may well be that these ribs cause a problem. I like the idea of having a largish flat surface here for your kind of striking tool to rest on. There is taper there, it's 7 degrees. And again, I've gone with 7 degrees taper on the handle. And you can see the bumps where the captive nut holes are. There's also, I've added on these 2 handle pieces, because I'm trying to use feeders now, I've added 2 little pinholes which will line up with this feeder pattern, and that will fit in there. Now unfortunately, because I've reused the slots from previous prototypes, they might be a bit big. Well, they are in the way I've laid them out here. I may actually have to do what I did with these little nut holes and end the slots early, so that at the moment this flat piece here is too small, I think. The largest I can make that little feeder gate is only 6mm because of these slots on either side. If this has promise when I first cast it, then I will make these slots smaller in this area, and that way I can make the feeder gates larger if needed. So that's the standard handle module with its associated feeder part. Now, do you remember before, I've also made a module, like on the previous versions, that was based on one extension piece but with 2 fat columns on it. Let me use this as a way of showing you how easy it is to dismantle the parts and reassemble them. So, you have to be a little bit more gentle. It's slightly less positive than the tapered dovetails, but nonetheless, it is perfectly doable. So there we go, I took that one out. Let's put that one in. There we go. So that's the fat column module put in instead of the other handle. And as you can see, it is dead flat still. So this is the module that I was thinking would be useful if you wanted to make your own handle design and just sort of bolt it straight onto this module here. These kind of fat columns give you a nice place to drill through. You could put screw threads in it or just bolt all the way through to the back. It's a bit sort of more beefy and a bit stronger. But because they're fat columns, and previously the fat columns have caused us bending issues, I put two little feeder alignment holes right in the middle of these columns. And here's another double feeder unit that will just fit on top of that. But again, the gate is probably a little small, but we're going to go for it this time around. So that's where we're at. Oh, another bit of news. Late last night, I was in bed, and actually I was waiting for these to finish printing, and I had an email from Wargrade, another casting channel, Andy, and he's a great guy. He sent me an email about these flasks, and he said, don't be frightened of going thin. And I think I'm with him on that. This plate is 8mm thick at the moment with these ribs. It may well be, if this casts well, bear in mind that this kind of ridge here may cause us problems with bending, but assuming it isn't, we could reduce the height of that even further. Now I went with 8mm because I'm still using 4mm grooves in the bottom here, and I didn't want to go too thin without changing the grooves. I just didn't want to change everything all at once. So I went with 8 to start with, but that gives 8mm for the wings, which is probably thin enough. Probably don't want to go too much thinner with the wings, but we'll see, because I might need a little bit of allowance to do some sanding once the parts are together, and if they're super thin, you won't be able to take off much with a sander. Oh, and one other thing Wargrade said, and then I scrolled to the bottom of the email, and I saw this photo. And as you can see, potentially, that is an awesome idea. I think if I can somehow automatically cast in sort of slots on the edges of these wings, I think that might be a nice time-saving idea. I'm going to go with this first. I'll probably cast, I'm actually printing a few more bits now on the printer, and by the time I do some casting, which might be in the next couple of days, I will hopefully have enough to do a small side with this module in the middle, and alongside another small side with this in the middle. So I'll be able to do two, and I'll be able to try out both feeder styles. So you got this one and this one. Yeah, and that's where we're at now. So there are plenty of new avenues to explore. You guys, as per usual, are coming up with the goods. This one mainly is about Perry and Wargrade, but you know, if it hadn't been for every other suggestion before that, we wouldn't have got this far. So you're all awesome, as per usual. Oh, talking of Perry again, I finally got off my backside and I printed one of these spin trap doodads that Perry's always using. I had a chat with him last week about it on Google Hangouts, and he sort of showed me, he sent me his little model, and I based it on that, and it's essentially the same but just sort of slightly longer because I've got a longer pattern. And this bit comes off, and this end piece is based on the end of my sprue here. When I sort the drag out, so this will be the table, and I'll put my patterns in like that. let's just pretend for a moment that I've got another pattern there. I'm doing 2. I'll put this in the middle. And then I'll put the drag on, ram it up with sand, and then when I flip it over, it'll essentially be like that in the top of the sand. And then I will put this piece on there, and then I'll put the tapered sprue. I've drilled a little hole, actually quite badly. I've split my sprue there, but I've glued it back together. And I'll take one of these little things and I'll pop the sprue in there, and then I'll fill up the cope with sand, and hopefully that'll give me a lovely tapered sprue with a spin trap and nice wide, and I'm hoping cool gates. I'm trying to keep the heat to a minimum in this area, but we'll see. I'm just super excited as per usual. You guys have come up with the goods. It's just brilliant. I'm just loving this whole process. So at the moment, this is where we're at. So yeah, I just thought I'd do a little update because you guys are still emailing me great ideas, but they're kind of based on my last video, which was kind of 5 iterations ago, because I can't keep up with the video making, because making a video takes so long that it's easier for me just to do a quick update now and show you all the steps in one go rather than make a video with each update, if you see what I mean. But this is where we are at right now. I'm essentially going to hope to publish this video before I do the casting. So you guys are fully up to date now. And yeah, I'm super excited. This is the best of both worlds now. I've taken Perry's idea of the one dovetail, but laid horizontally, not vertically like the last one. And all I've done is take Perry's idea and I've split it into 8 that makes sure we can print it without any supports. So because of that idea, I really feel like this could be the end of the road almost. And one other thing I love about this idea, because it's flat, it's kind of expandable in any dimension without it affecting the casting too much, I think. Before, when I had loads of ribs, if you expand, I couldn't just kind of double the height to make a super deep flask. Some of you guys want flasks that are 4 inches deep, 100 millimeters. I mean, this is 80. Some of you might want one that's 160 deep, which is super wide. And I think this could literally be almost doubled up, and maybe forget that rib there and just kind of split it there and just sort of stretch it and have a rib at the top of the bottom. We'll see about the ribs. Aesthetically, I love the idea of the rib, and it gives a little bit more strength, but if it affects the straightness on the cooling, we might have to think again about that. Anyway, I'm going to stop yapping. I bet this is a really long video. I didn't want it to be. But yeah, that's where we're at now. We've got a kind of a new take on the tapered dovetail. It's super flat. I'm going to try one of these little doodads. I'm excited to try this. And for the first time, I've got lovely pin-aligned feeders. It's just brilliant. All this new exciting stuff I'm doing, all because I just fancied making a metal flask. And I love how that this still means that the modules are what it's all about. You could make your flask as long as you like with the way this is going. I'm super excited. There's my little piece of paper. It's true. Woo! You guys are awesome! Thank you very much to all of you. I really appreciate all the help and the suggestions and the ideas. This has essentially been like a full-time job since I started this project, but I am loving it. And while the energy is there and the momentum, I'm going to keep going with it. But I really feel like whenever we've come across like a difficulty, we've overcome it. And look where we've got to now. Bloomin' love it. If this casts as well as it looks, we are sorted. All right, everyone, that is a really long video. Just a little update. Goodbye.